everyone, it's Carrie. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. I hope One Book July is treating you well. This video is very late. This should have been up Monday at the latest. It is now Friday. And I will not make excuses. I will not. I can sit here and look at, my planner and go, oh my gosh, you know how it is when all the big things all happen at once? That's always what July is like. I don't know why. I don't plan it that way. So I won't make excuses. I should have had this done before now. I should have had this done before now. The boy who moved home, we got him moved home. The boy who got his master's, we had his graduation party. So those things are done. So this can all settle down a little bit now. Let's all hope for that. Okay. So we are here. This should be week 2 of One Book July. Doing chapters 7 through 13 of The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen. I have a copious amount of notes. I am probably not going to read all of them. Jack is sitting in the back room at his desk. He keeps peeking up over his computer monitor at me. I come out here to record these for a reason. It is to be left alone. So let me find my notes real quick. Okay, so we start off. So last week we did chapters 1 through 6. So that was about, we started off with like wax tablets, moved on to paper, the birth of accounting, birth of the sketchbook, notebooks in the home, the book of Michael of Rhodes, and the notebook coming to England and talking about Chaucer and whatnot. So week 2 is chapters 7 through 13, and chapter 7 starts us off 1450 to 1600 roughly. Of course, somebody's coming through the back door. I'm telling you, seriously, it doesn't matter how old they get. The youngest is 13. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anywhere I am is just a revolving door of people. Anyway, so chapter 7 it kind of takes us from 1450 to the present. We're going to kind of stick to the earlier part of that. So like 1450 to 1600. We've talked about the spread of the notebook, kind of spreading north, like from Italy, and west from, we talked about Middle Eastern countries and what the huge knowledge growth that happened there, the invention of paper and whatnot. But it also spread south, and there's this little book. It's just called LHD 244. It's a strange little book. It's in a library in Melbourne, Australia. It's a little smaller than A6 size. I'm going to describe to you what is so weird about this little book. So it's a little smaller than A6 size. It has 118 paper pages, but those pages are at least 7 different kinds of paper. It's bound up in gatherings, which I imagine they meant kind of like signatures, but some of them are 4 pages and they range up to having 24 pages in them. So all different sizes of gatherings. It has been rebound at least 3 times. It's had at least 10 separate writers in it. It has all different kinds of scripts. Different people write different ways, right? It's kind of a musical Zibaldone. Remember we talked about a Zibaldone last video. It is a teacher's handbook of musical theory used by Franciscans. And what I found really cool about it was it contains some of the earliest references to harmonizing. Liturgical chanting didn't have any harmonizing in it, but it evolved into having more harmonic sophistication. And this little notebook has all kinds of things. It has this diagram of a hand showing you different things for like a mnemonic, basically a physical mnemonic of like how to play chords and whatnot. And I had marked one page in particular with all my little page flags. But it had been the weird thing that people who have studied this little book have kind of thought is, well, why people were recopying things a lot during this period in history. Why did this book get handed through so many at least 10 different people, why wasn't it just recopied? Why was it consistently rebound? Why were new pages added? Some pages were glued together because apparently somebody wrote something that didn't want anybody else to see, so they glued the pages together. It's missing some pages. They can tell it's been rebound at least 3 different times. And it says here in the book on page 102, why did none of LHD 244's many owners ever make a clean copy in a new notebook? For such a small codex, the cost would have been minimal, and the scribal task, in an era when epic poems were routinely copied out in full, easily manageable. Why did they carry on referring to this tiny book, carefully stitching it back together when it fell apart, and constantly adding new material as they came across it? Sentimentality may provide the answer. This tatty, scarred, yet practical notebook must have acquired value as it passed from hand to hand, accreting knowledge and nuance as it went. The constant companion of a succession of childless Franciscans living and dying together in the community of their order. Perhaps it came to embody the bonds that grew between teachers and students as they worked together to make music. Perhaps it became, in its own way, a relic, which I thought was really sweet, and it really is a good way to explain why this odd little book, sorry about that, it was in they believe a Franciscan monastery, so things were being recopied all the time. They had scribes who did this, and considering the length of some of the epic poems that were being recopied by hand, recopying this little book would not have been that big of a deal. It would have been a huge amount of work, but it never was. And I love the idea of, this book is being passed like from teacher to student, being passed amongst students. I just love that idea that that's why they kept it intact as it was. So it's a really, really interesting chapter. I'm leaving out a ton, but I absolutely loved it. And I really, really suggest you read it with detail. So our next one is chapter 8. Chapter 8 is about 2 notebook keepers in Italy. They're talking 1455 to 1519. Boy, that motorcycle's just not going to quit. There was a man named Luca Pacioli. We get a little bit of his background, and he became a Franciscan friar, but he had enough connections in the Vatican that he got released from the vow of poverty, and he traveled all over Italy. And as he traveled, he would dig through the libraries and monasteries for all of their mathematical texts. So he basically compiled this huge zibaldone of all the mathematics knowledge that he could find in Italy. And he came back to Venice in 1494, and he had written a treatise on math. Now, while he had been traveling, the printing press had arrived in Venice, okay? So Pacioli wants to publish this summation of European mathematical knowledge, and Paganino de Paganini publishes it for him. And this thing is humongous. It is very long. It contains, ready, there's a list. Algebra, currency conversions, multiplication tables, weights and measures, Euclidean geometry, and then information about Archimedes, Euclid, and Piero della Francesca. And one entire book of this massive book is about double entry bookkeeping. We are back to double entry bookkeeping again. Book 9 contained the entries about double entry bookkeeping. It also has instructions on letter writing, record keeping, and filing. And one of the people who has studied this book deeply says Book 9 was the nearest thing to an MBA textbook that the 15th century had to offer. And in this Book 9, Pacioli also advises the use of those same 4 notebooks that we talked about in the prior video: a daybook, a journal, a general ledger, a book for correspondence, and then possibly a 5th book, a waste book. So this whole summation, summa, became hugely popular to the point that he was even granted a copyright. Multiple printings of this thing sold out. And this book eventually brought Pacioli into contact with Leonardo da Vinci. Now, when I first saw this book, Da Vinci was the first person I thought of, right? I'm pretty sure everybody's heard about Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. So Da Vinci was the first person to pop into my head when I first saw this book. He kept many, many notebooks, loads of notes, loads of drawings. You guys all know this. I love to study pretty much anything and everything, you know, science, engineering, you name it. So he had all these, I don't know, his notebooks have always struck me as, it's truly like having your notebook work for you, right? Like he truly utilized the stuff that was in his notebooks and produced things with it. Everything in his works of art can be matched to notebook entries that he made. He made copious study of water, like the flow of water, what it looked like when it flowed, naming different types of water turbulence. And you can see that later in his works of art, like the way garments drape, the way water behaves, light on water and light on like skin, right? So he has, we all know, he has tons and tons and tons of notebooks, but his notebooks really don't contain much that's personal. And again, this is a chapter I'm skipping over quite a bit here. But there was one comment in the book made about one of the few times he does say anything of kind of a personal nature. It was something that made me chuckle because I think it's something we can all relate to. He has a lot of, here and there, he'll have comments along the lines of like, this will never get anything done. Oh my gosh, if Da Vinci felt like he wasn't getting anything done, what hope is there for me? But I just found that interesting. So we had Pacioli, who had all these notebooks on mathematics, wrote his huge mathematical summation, his treatise, and then obviously Da Vinci's notebooks full of, you name it, you know, just loads and loads and loads of things. The interesting thing was after their deaths, Da Vinci's notebooks sat in an attic, okay? Pacioli's work spread the need for these 4 notebooks like we talked about, you know, the journal, the ledger book. His work became hugely popular, spread the idea of teaching people to use those 4 notebooks far and wide. And for ages, Da Vinci's notebooks sat in an attic, completely untouched. So I just thought that was interesting, where if you look at that from the present day, where I had never even heard of Pacioli till I read this book, but we all know who Da Vinci is, right? So then we are on to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is about commonplace books. It made me very happy. So starting in the early 1500s, there was an Augustinian monk, and then he became a priest. His name was Erasmus of Rotterdam. He collected proverbs and adages in notebooks, and he also published school books and religious texts. In his school books, he taught each reader needed to collect a, quote, mass of material according to their needs and to organize it logically. He taught a lot about proper speaking, right? Proper ways to make an argument for or against something. And his thing was, if you have a commonplace book, then you have a reference to work from. So if you had a particular thing you needed to speak about, you would have a commonplace book, and you would start doing your research that would support whatever point you were trying to make was, and you would file that research under certain headings. You would set certain headings. He had a whole framework for how you would use a commonplace book, and organize all of this breadth, you know, all this material logically, so that you could use it when forming your argument. The thing is and we've talked about it here in my videos. I've heard several of you talk about it before. I love that this is becoming, you know, all the time a more widely known idea. It feels like is that physically writing something down, commonplacing, forces the reader to engage with material in a lot more intensive way, in a lot livelier way. You read with better concentration when you're going to have to then copy something down. If you're in this case trying to support a certain point you're trying to make, you really think through the point of the text so that you can log it under the correct heading, which again would make it easier to find after the fact as well. And physically copying the selection by hand makes it easier to remember and more present in your thinking. So as you are forming your argument and you're hand copying these down, you can start to make connections between possibly disparate things just because they're a little more present in your thinking without you actively thinking about them, right? There's a quote in here on page 130, turning pages. You know, I even have a page tab on there and I can't get to it. There we go. And the other point that is made in here that I love about commonplacing, and you guys have heard me say it here before too, is your brain is for thinking, not for storage, right? Now that is not a Carey original by any stretch of the imagination. I think the first time I ever ran across that was in David Allen's Getting Things Done. This idea that commonplacing, writing things down by hand, frees up mental capacity for reason and reflection. And there's a great quote in here on page 130 about that. Finally, the well-arranged commonplace functioned as a kind of externalized memory, which, as historian Anne Blair notes, liberated the reader from the task of memorizing the selected passages. This, in turn, freed up mental capacity for reasoning and reflection, and was particularly useful in an age when the rate of arrival of new books far outstripped anyone's ability to master their contents. So I love that even we're talking way back, early 1500s, this concept of your brain is for thinking and not for storage. So it's definitely not a new idea. So from there, we move on to chapter 10. And chapter 10 was about Magellan's circumnavigation of the Earth. I didn't write down a whole lot about this. It was a super interesting chapter, so I hope you go and read it. There was a man in 1519 named Francisco Albo. He was on one of Magellan's 5 ships that were sent out trying to find a western route to the East Indies. Francisco Albo kept Albo. They said possibly Alba or Alba, like there were several. They're not quite sure what his last name is, but we're going with Albo, not Elbow. He was, as I said, on one of Magellan's 5 ships that was trying to find a western route to the East Indies. He kept a navigation record. His journal survives. It is basically a navigation record. A lot of latitude and longitude, like a log. Here and there descriptions of landmarks, things like that. It was pretty much a nav log, and that was about it. However, on the same trip was another man. His last name was Pigafetta, and he kept an event record. And what's interesting is if you research anything about that trip, like Magellan left with 5 ships, came back with 1, left with loads of men, came back with 22. And if you were to read only through Francisco Albo's navigational record, there's a whole whack of stuff that happened that you'd never know about, right? He never ever makes reference to any of these things, like all these men that died, ships that disappeared, basically, mutinies and starvation and all these horrible things. And it's not mentioned at all. It's a log. It's like a navigational log, and that's it. Whereas Pigafetta's, his is more of an event record. He's not logging latitude and longitude, things like that. He's keeping an event log. Now, they do say, it's possible that Albo knew that Pigafetta was keeping this log, so he didn't feel the need to log those things. He was basically sticking to nav log stuff, right? But it's a really interesting chapter. You think about, they get through to the Pacific, and they're out forever on the Pacific, where they think they're going to be for 3 or 4 days at one point, and it's like, no, it's months and months. I think they were gone for like 2 years or something like that. So super interesting chapter, and how this interplay between, one person kept a very detailed navigation log, one person kept a very detailed event log, but if we didn't have them together, we wouldn't have the whole picture. And I love that. I love that 2 people's notebooks give us the entire picture. Then we are on to chapter 11, which is in the Netherlands in 1570. Now, and I loved this one. I love this. This is like a naturalist's book, right? It's kind of a good introduction to like an ecologist's notebook, a naturalist's notebook, a biologist's notebook. In the 1570s, Adrian Coenen was in the Netherlands. He was an auctioneer at the local fish market in Scheveningen on the coast of the North Sea. Okay, herring fishing was a massive business, hugely lucrative industry at the time. And Coenen had this visboek, or a fish book, which contained descriptions and drawings of various fish that people sold at the market that he was the auctioneer at. So he would go out into the market, and people would be out herring fishing, and they'd bring their herring in, but then they'd bring in the other stuff that they caught in their nets too, right? So he's seeing all these various organisms that he'd never laid eyes on before, so he starts to keep a log of them. He talks about, you name it, hammerhead sharks, shrimp, turtles, on and on and on and on and on, all different kinds of fish, whales, you name it. And what's really interesting is what he did was he would draw them, and then he would draw them. He would put his text in like descriptive, like description boxes by the drawings, and then the back was like all a wash of watercolor. And here is a really good picture of what those look like. I just think that is so cool. It's very hard to see if I'm getting that in there because I'm getting a huge reflection. Like, look at those drawings. I think that's amazing. I can't draw to save my life. So I think this is so cool. And it says in the book, if it swam, dived, or drifted, Conan wanted to know. Like, this was not his, his main business. He was the auctioneer, but he loved this. Sorry, I kicked the stand. He did end up taking this as, he got a permit to show some things at a fair. He showed drawings from his book. He did take this out to the public. And one of the really interesting things about this is, yes, scientists, naturalists were studying these things. But in other places, like in England and whatnot, these things were all, there was a certain gatekeeping of the knowledge because of language. People would write things about the natural world in Latin and Greek, right? He really democratized naturalism because he used common language. So anybody, who had come to that market, let's say, could pick up this book and look through it, see the pictures, read the descriptions, and understand it, because you didn't need to know Latin or Greek to do that. So that is kind of our first naturalist notebook. And then we are on to chapter 12, which is Northern Europe in 1645, and this is friendship books. I loved this chapter so much. This is basically, I don't know what I picture as today's an autograph book, but a way bigger deal, right? So this became really popular at universities in the mid 1600s, especially in the Netherlands, Northern Europe. Students would have these little books that they carried everywhere with them, and they'd ask professors, local dignitaries, and their friends to sign their Stammbucher. And it was later called an Alba Amicorum, but it started as a Stammbucher. So people would write their autograph, the date, a motto or an epigram, and a personal expression of admiration to the person that the book belonged to. Okay. Now, the cool thing about this was, when this was started, it was kind of like, what a cool keepsake for later in life. It kind of reminds me about getting your high school yearbook signed at the end of the year, right? But these were little books these people carried everywhere. And I would say these guys, because it was mostly men, because only men were allowed in the universities at the time. But students were also very encouraged to travel, to learn more. And they would take these books with them. So not only did you have this keepsake, but you also had credentials, right? If you had met somebody important and they signed your Stammbucher, well, then as you traveled, you could show that to other people as they are signing it, and it would serve as your educational credentials. And then after you traveled and had it signed by different, people in different places, different professors at different schools and whatnot, then you would come back home and it was proof of the quality of your education. So it started out as this, kind of, oh, how cool to be able to relive your youth later in life, by reading through the autographs and little notes that your friends made to you. And here, it also serves as educational credentials, which is really cool. And then our last chapter is chapter 13. Oh, fly. This was Germany and Italy in 1598. So this is the late medieval period. There was a huge boom in European innovation, and there weren't any engineering schools, there weren't any architectural schools. So people relied on traveling, seeing different things, and technical drawings. So in January of 1598, Heinrich Schickhardt traveled throughout northern Italy. He was a master builder, which meant he was an engineer, city planner, basically the industrial specialist, architect, you name it, anything engineering, civil engineering, architecture, he was your guy. Okay, and so he would travel. He worked for, I'm going to forget it. Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it. He was in the employ of Duke Friedrich, and Duke Friedrich saw that this guy was smart, right? He became the master engineer. Oh my gosh, flies. So the Duke sent him out across Italy to go learn things, go learn things, bring the innovation back to us, right? So he goes out and ends up making drawings. He goes on 2 trips and ends up with 4 different notebooks full. So the first notebook was the first trip: water-driven pumps, devices for deepening canals without having to drain the canal, details of fortresses, floor plans of different places, maps of cities of different places, all kinds of things. So then he comes back, and a year later, he and the Duke take off again, and he fills up 3 more notebooks, more architecture, floor plans, the construction costs of everything, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which he draws leaning more than it actually is, which I found interesting, descriptions of Roman churches, a wheelchair, a floating water mill, coaches, fountains, statues, like you name it, anything and everything that would have to be engineered in some sort of way. He would draw it, describe it, find out the construction costs, how construction time, anything like that. And that was how these notebooks were used, because they're, like I said, there weren't schools to teach people these things. So people would innovate, experiment, come up with these things on their own, and then other people would travel there to see it, study it, draw it, make technical drawings. So this is kind of the first time in the notebook history that we know of, at least, that we see really detailed technical drawings. And again, I'll show you. Here's 2. The one is from his first trip, and the other one is from his second trip. So this is the device that deepens a canal without removing the water from it, and then there's his drawing of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which I thought was awesome. But I mean, look at how detailed these drawings are, right? No schooling, nothing like that. Water pumps, mills run by water, on and on and on and on. This guy was brilliant. I'm glad his Duke saw his brilliance. That bird just about came and got me. So that is chapter 7 through 13 of the notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper. I am determined to get our next set, which is, what would it be? 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Chapters 14 through 20. Video for that should be up by Sunday or Monday. Okay, I'm going to do my level best. We're hoping with all these big things done here, things will calm down. We shall see. So, and I still haven't shown you guys a flip through of this. So I got to get that done. But I am still in 1 book for the month. That's been pretty easy peasy, because there's been a lot of working on this in little bits and pieces, so I need to have everything in here to take notes. So I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know down below how One Book July is treating you. Let me know what you're thinking of the notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper. I would love to hear your thoughts. What is your favorite part so far? What is one thing that you learned that you didn't know before? I would love to know, so please let me know down below, and I will see you again soon. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. Bye-bye.